Okay, good afternoon, Vitsis. We're ready to start. I trust that you're all well. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to the WITS Alumni webinars. Thanks to our alumni office for hosting these virtual webinars, which have proven to be extremely popular and very interesting. And I'm sure today is going to be no exception. My name is Logan Rangasamy, and I am the academic director at the WITS Business School. I'm standing in for our head of school, Professor Maurice Radebe, who, due to a COVID-related bereavement in his family, is not able to be with us today. He has asked me to convey his apologies for his absence. WITS is an iconic brand in South Africa and globally. We owe this to our alumni, from the 4 Nobel laureates to the 91 Rhodes Scholars to the many leaders in governments, academia, and various other professions, including the business sector. We are confident that our alumni will continue to be the facilitators of change and development that we so desperately need in our country and globally. The new normal has evolved with COVID and its related implications having significant implications for business operations. It is clear that success dictates that social imperatives must become an integral part of the business agenda. In this regard, cultural and other social dimensions are key. We need business leaders who are critical thinkers, problem solvers, leaders who are resilient and adaptable. In an environment of gloom, negativity, uncertainty, and sometimes downright irrationality, visionary leaders see problems and challenges as opportunities to succeed. We certainly need such business leaders in Africa. This brings us nicely to our webinar today. Pavlo Phitidis has 25 years of direct experience in conceptualizing and building businesses across 4 continents. He has developed and brought to market business assets in excess of $350 million through a combination of startups, turnarounds, sales, and acquisition. He is best known for his work at Aurik, who have around 400 clients in South Africa and approximately 100 in the US and UK. Pavlo focuses on practical strategies, tactics, and mindsets to take businesses to the next level of growth and value. He's the author of 2 books, Sweat, Scale, and Sell, which is a playbook on how to transform a business into an asset that can be sold, and also another one entitled Reset, Rebuild, and Reignite, which offers practical insights on how businesses can thrive during a crisis. We were just talking earlier on, and he says he's got a 3rd book that's coming out next year. He's also the resident entrepreneurial and business growth content contributor at 702 in Cape Town. WITS Business School is proud to count Pavlo as one of its alumni. I'm sure his presentation and the discussions that will follow will be the highlight of your week. Before I hand over to Pavlo, I just want to say, if you've got any questions, please use the questions box that's set out there. And also, please, for any other comments, you may use the chat box. So, Pavlo, over to you. Really looking forward to a great presentation and interaction today.
Rob, thank you for such a warm welcome. I think that at the time I was at the school, I created a lot of consternation for the then Dean of the faculty, Mike Ward, and a few of his colleagues, constantly challenging the content in the lectures, the process of business itself. And what's interesting is I exited that school with a collection of friends who have become, without question of doubt, my dearest and closest friends. I've got very, very fond memories of the time that I had there, very fond indeed. So thank you so much for such a lovely welcome. I really appreciate it.
Yes.
Good. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for giving up time to be here today. I'm talking to a screen, so I would really so look forward to seeing your comments in the chat. Any comments you want to make. Tell me I'm talking nonsense. Tell me that there is some value from time to time. My assurance to you is that I will answer every single question that's answered. I might not be able to complete it in the process of our time together, but I have made an undertaking to Prof. Logan and his team that I will get questions put to everybody, or answers put to everyone. And we have a canny way of getting that done. So please be assured you can ask a question on anything. If I don't know the answer or don't have a view, well, I might have a view, but it might not be right or wrong for that matter. I'll still certainly share it with you. What I'd like to do is I have a couple of slides to really guide the presentation. I'd like to talk to you for about 35 minutes or so, and then open up for half an hour Q&A, proper engagement around real questions and real issues. And with that, I'm going to migrate onto sharing my screen. You should be able to see a picture that confirms that I have a face for radio rather than a face for screens and TV. So can I confirm, Prof, can you and your team all see that? Is everyone good with the picture?
Perfect, Pavlo. Great stuff.
Lovely. Okay, wonderful. So I'm going to share a little bit of an origin story from yesterday to today, what brought us to where we are today, what brought me where I am today, because I think that context is important. Whenever I engage with anybody, I'm always interested in their backstory. And the reason for it is Carl Gustav Jung, arguably one of the foremost thinkers around how our psyches and cognitive minds and souls work, turned around and said, we are all trapped by the images of our past. We carry our history into the future. So it's always important to understand what informs an individual's view. A large part of it will be based on the past, but then depending on the individual psychology, it might well also be based on the present, moving into the future. I then want to talk about what happened when COVID came. Things were going swimmingly well, and COVID came. And gosh, we had to respond to it for very good reasons. And I'll share what we did, what we saw across the world. When I say the world, we've got clients in South Africa, so I'll be talking to South Africa, the US, the UK, and EU. And very, very luckily and fortunately, we've got some clients in Hong Kong. And I'll explain the reason why we consider that to be happy and fortunate. I'd then like to share a couple of market mentalities, specifically around the SME segment. And the SME segment is really a business doing between $1 and $50 million of annual revenue. So that's the segment that I talk to. But I'll share what I saw and what we believe will be happening in South Africa, in the US, in the UK, and in Europe specifically. And then we'll move on to some questions. And I would then like to ask, or complete it with my ask to you. The one thing I've really appreciated of late from Wits is we are finally getting an alumni together. You know, those friendships that I spoke about when I was talking to you prior to the slide opening, those friendships have yielded me not only with tremendous meaning and joy and warmth and love and friendship, but also tremendous value. I think that we are becoming Argonauts as South Africans, and we're living all over the world. It's really important we figure out a way to connect with each other, because the success of a South African here or any other part of the world is a success to all of us if we are part of that community. So I will put an ask to you. There's not anyone out there who doesn't need help and assistance. So with that, I will be going. Lawrence, yes, it's Pavlo's screen that he's sharing, correct. Here's the origin story. So let's start with the origin story. The origin is, I was born to a family of entrepreneurs, and I saw directly what business life was all about for individuals who had to get into business, build their own businesses in order to generate income, to raise their families, feed their families, educate their families, house their families, and create a legacy of some shape or form. Employed people see that as a pension. Entrepreneurs see that classically as an exit, a sale of a business. Two of my uncles worked until their late 80s, not because they wanted to, but because they had to. They had built businesses that generated income, but they built businesses that were simply not able to be sold. I then started my life as a youngster. Prof, don't worry about what I'm about to say. Please don't panic. This was before Wits Business School. This was directly after I merged out of university with my undergrad and master's, but it was before BITS Business School. And with the undergrad and master's, I thought really that I knew it all. And I acquired a business for $1, not realizing that it had undisclosed liabilities of around $420,000. So in South African rands at the time, it was sitting at around 4.2, 4.4, 4.5 million rands for the princely sum of a 20 rand purchase. There were some lessons to be learned in that, and fortunately, touch wood, 5 years later, the business was successfully sold, and I repeated the process with the second business, but this time I was aware of the liabilities attached. And what really I found interesting is these two businesses that I'd acquired from folks who were already at that stage in their 60s, and effectively I was buying their life works for $1 a piece. It was quite interesting. I then had a brief period in mergers and acquisitions with one of the big investment banks in South Africa. Loved that. It was very exciting. But really, it was quite frustrating because the delta between what people thought their businesses were worth and the calculation of fair value for a business, that gap was always enormous, and it was perplexing. And as I was about to get into that space, I got hauled into the family business to meet with my father, only to realize that a man who I truly loved, admired, and would give my life for was in dire straits. His life's work, which had catered to his family and looked after us, was coming to an end, and there was no value left in the business. And yet every single cent of free cash he had invested into the business. And he had done everything right. He'd done it by the book. He had done everything we are taught to do. And yet it was just not possible for him to get that exit. So I went through a succession and learned a lot about old lines and young lines. The benefit for me personally, on a very, very personal basis, was the battles we had, and battles we had big battles, transformed our relationship from father-son to friends. So there was a big gain and big benefit there. Fortunately, 3.5 years later, that business was successfully sold. And I burnt out and went to the States. I was there for about 18, 19 odd months. I spent my time on the West Coast of the United States, and I was really consulting to early stage businesses. I was consulting around raising capital, and I was consulting in the M&A space. And America came alive for me in the most cogent terms, because the amount of data that is available in that economy is just beyond comprehensible. And I got into that data, and I sliced it and diced it 1,000 ways from Sunday to learn that 94.6% of businesses started in the United States of America failed to sell. They close, and they close at a tremendous cost, obviously to the business owner and their families, to the employees and staff, but also to the communities that they operate in. And I didn't understand that, because in a country that has such vibrancy, that has a government which at that stage was so in favor of business and supportive of business, that has money sloshing around, that has talent creeping in from all its borders, bleeding into the country. How was that possible? How was that possible? 94.6%. Interestingly, 2.5 years ago, a fantastic study came out of Australia, which is a very well-organized economy, and showed that the numbers in Australia are 97.2% of businesses started failed to sell. Nevertheless, I then got conned by Chris Miller, who was my lecturer in corporate finance at BITS at the time, to take on a role of an external examiner. And I was an external examiner with one or two of my colleagues on company valuations. The papers were all done as part of a project within the corporate finance elective of the MBA. And I ended up marking a lot of papers. So I have enormous sympathy to you and your team, trying to read handwriting, make sense of handwriting. I'm a right-handed person with a left-handed style, which makes most of what I do illegible, including my own thinking from time to time. Nevertheless, I then really doubled down and learned about the mathematics of valuation, the levers that craft and create valuation. And it really closed an enormous gap between the way that people build businesses to generate income and how businesses need to be built in order to be sold. 94.6%, that was a problem worth solving. I decided to come back to South Africa, and with that, to start a business to solve that problem. Having no clue what I was doing, I had also, fortunately, from BITS and my experiences there in marketing those papers, found a business partner. The two of us established Aurik about 15 odd years ago. And the way that we approached this is we said, well, we need to understand what it is that we're going to offer and sell, and we need to understand how to fix this problem. And the best way to do it is to find truth in action. Over a 9-year period, we started, built, and sold 12 businesses across 6 sectors. 2 listed on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, 2 failed, 3 were sold to management buyouts, and 5 were bought by corporate entities looking for growth and innovation. And they gave good returns, but the most exciting thing that we learned was that the last handful took about half the time and a third of the investment to build to the same value as the first handful. And through this process, having a fairly structured mind and approach, we started to articulate what activity sets we deployed in the establishment of business 1 all the way through to business number 12. And we defined 207 very clear activities and put them into a very well structured sequence, which we've now offered to over 2,871 businesses. Businesses for us are SMEs, as I mentioned earlier, a business doing between $1 million and $50 million of annual revenue. The performance of the portfolio has been quite impressive, I think, given the environment that we're in. The South African economy has been in regression for the last 10 years, but we are borrowing some of our stats over here through clients that we have in the US, the UK, and Europe. And the average compound annual growth rates that we have seen across that portfolio sit at 28.9%. Put differently, that is a business that doubles in its revenue every 33, 34 odd months. At the same time, we work over a set period of time. The exiting average EBITDA growth rates sit at 32.4%, and that gives a very, very nice impact. We built an underlying technology platform to administer and deliver the service at scale, which allows us to have an operating portfolio at the moment of about 630, 640 odd businesses, and we get very nice client ratings coming out of it. So that's the backstory. And what we learned was, in order to get to the right side of the stats, in other words, the 5.6% of businesses that are built to generate not only income growth, but capital value, and that can be sold, we had to solve, in effect, 9 growth impediments, which are set out in 3 areas. From a mindset point of view, one of the biggest challenges that many business owners face is understanding their own relevance. There is nothing like starting your own business and going out into the market full of enthusiasm and optimism and applying your trade and applying the best of what you can be and being rejected again and again and again and again. And every time you get from one level and trying to go to the next, it feels like you're taking 2 steps forward and 4 steps back. And that process in itself creates a lot of consternation on the very, very lonely journey of building a business around how relevant you are, how do you cope with an overcrowded, noisy environment. To give you a sense, our addressable market in South Africa is about 45,000 businesses. In the state of Illinois alone, using the same demographics, our addressable market there is close on 262,000 businesses. There is no space that's uncontended, and any business that you build today has immediately local and global competitors that create a tremendous amount of noise and uncertainty. So dealing with mindset, ensuring that you can maintain relevance around your actions all the time matters. Time, it's fascinating. We don't understand time. It is a human construct. We have no intuitive cognitive relationship with it until you hit a certain age and you get a creak in your bone, or a pinch in a joint, or that mane starts to fall out or turn a different color, and the body part is not as firm as it may be, whatever the case might be. You first realize it physically before you actually adopt and relate to it mentally. And yet time runs out. It is the single most precious commodity we have available to us all. And very often with our earlier stage businesses, our younger businesses, and when I say young, I'm talking early 30s, moving to later 30s, there's a complete disrespect around time and how to capitalize on that energy and fight that you have within you at that stage. Very often people are completely consumed with being busy, as opposed to leading the growth of the business. They are the growth in the business. And then we faced with a lot of issues around delegations and controls. You know, the ability to let go of something that you have developed a capability of delivering yourself, and to pass it on to a team, so that instead of you rowing the boat, you can get a team to row the boat alongside with you. And perhaps then you can focus your time building a sail. That transition, moving from an income generative mindset to building an asset-based mindset, is very interesting psychologically to cope with. From a design point of view, sales and marketing, how do you find, win and hold customers, has become increasingly challenged. The world is overserviced, people are oversold. Digital marketing is dead. Please challenge me on that, shoot me down on it. There are a lot of people who make a good living off selling their proposition. There is an enormous amount of evidence to support what I'm saying, and we've adopted that view, and it has been enlightening. It's where we get a lot of our growth. So we talk extensively around the challenge of customers and propositions. What we were taught at business school, and what is still taught at business school, around how to craft a value proposition is no longer relevant. Certainly within our segment, we have crafted very different value propositions over the last 7 years to cut through the noise and create relevance in a changing environment. Operationally, the way that you grow a business needs to fundamentally change. There are different techniques and methods that grow a business. We fundamentally believe that a business should be grown by a team rather than through instruction and direction from a leader. And most importantly, that business should be grown by customers. It's an agile approach. And those of you in the technology space will be very familiar with the waterfall approach versus the agile approach. We've created a business growth approach 5.0, whatever you want to call it. Give it a fancy name if you need to. It's an agile approach, and it's proved to be very successful. And then we talk extensively about people. One of the single biggest challenges in business, in life, for anyone who's got kids, for anyone who's got parents, especially elderly parents, to get the right people to do the right thing at the right time every time is almost impossible. It's the biggest single uncertainty in business. And yet we have never lived in a world with more skilled, more educated, more able, more capable people. We've never lived in a world where information is more freely available and skills are more freely available than ever before. We fundamentally bake into every client that we work with a program of lifelong learning. Because what you know today is not relevant necessarily tomorrow if you consider the rate and change of pace of the environment. And then finally, we talk a lot about purpose. Very often when I say to people, well, what do you want ahead? I want to grow. And growth really is a deep focus on turnover numbers. But the way to grow a business in a manner that keeps the business simple and scalable is fundamentally different to just simply chasing the deals down and getting growth on board. The way you grow a business to yield good value and a clean exit to put you in that 5.4% is fundamentally different to the way that we mostly build our businesses. Businesses are not bought, they are built to be sold. And through that, we talk about a job versus an asset, the big difference between the two. And we then start talking extensively around wealth. And ask yourselves, what does wealth mean to you? Because I don't think it's a subject that we ever talk enough around. Of course, there are all the emotional benefits of wealth, that I have created a life of meaning, that I have an impact, I make a difference in the world, I make a difference in the lives of people. But true wealth. And yes, I went through the investment aspect of our MBA, the elective, and we went into tremendous detail. It was profoundly valuable. But still, yet with that behind me, the idea of equity and how equity grows and how equity is the wealth of a business and income is the currency of a business. I don't think that's ever spoken about enough. So we get that solved by crafting what we call an asset of value. And an asset of value is a articulated structure made up of a number of layers atop each other that create a sequence of events organized into a system where the sum of the parts create an exponential whole. And we have anchored ourselves around that proposition. So that gives you a little bit of the backstory, a little bit about how we see the world, and things were going fantastically well. At the end of 2019, a lot of our clients were going through very strong growth impulses and growth outcomes. We have grown very successfully in the South African environment, despite the fact that the economy itself is not growing. And a little bit later on, I'll talk to where we found that growth and how we extracted that growth. Personally, for me, at the end of December 2019, I was gearing up to have another year of travel. I typically spend 2 weeks in South Africa, 2 weeks in the UK, and 2 weeks in the US on a rotating basis. I had put a whole lot of investment into place. We have brought on a whole lot of new team members to create additional capacity. And COVID came. COVID for me came when I received a telephone call from 2 of our clients operating out of Hong Kong. And they were talking about the flu, and they were talking about the government response to flu. They were talking about the rumors circulating in Hong Kong. And they were talking about the discussion of a lockdown until the lockdown did happen. Then they spoke about the reality that they were living through in that lockdown. And I got the fright of my life. Because, and Prof, incidentally, this is how I know I'm a terrible student and that you failed me because I made a bad decision in how we built Aurik. We decided that from an Aurik point of view, we were going to eat our own breakfast. And the way that we typically engage with our clients and the way that we charge for our fees is 75% of our fees are based on a client's growth. So we take an enormous amount of risk. And when I heard and saw what was happening to our Hong Kong clients, honestly, it felt like the blood left my entire system. Because we've got about 600 odd clients. And if you can imagine, 75% of our revenues attached to their growth performance, this was not looking good. So immediately what happened is in early January, I bought some Zoom shares and advised a couple of my colleagues to buy some Zoom shares. We then secured a master Zoom license and immediately broke the license up and engaged all our clients onto Zoom. We delivered Zoom training. We thought that this would be a critical skill to cope with what may be a lockdown coming through the rest of the world. And the reason we thought that is because the virus really does move from one country to the next. It doesn't see borders and boundaries. The next thing we did is we completely digitized all our content and we dematerialized any paperwork that we had and put it into a digital format. Over the period of February, we locked down ourselves. I think the last week of February. And in South Africa, the lockdown was announced from, I think, the 3rd week of March, the end of the 3rd week of March. And everyone was grumpy. Everyone was miserable. They were miserable about the fact that they couldn't come to the office. They were miserable about the fact that we were no longer seeing each other face to face. Our process of delivering our service is a face-to-face process with our clients right around the world. And very quickly, we started to act as if this was real and this was going to happen. And what that led to, when the lockdown was announced, we realized that we had to create a strategy to cope with it, not only for ourselves independently and individually, but right across our client base. And I launched a webinar called Build a Battle Plan to Beat Corona. And it had 3 elements to it. The first element it had was around taking control of yourself. And I used this model over here, the Kubler-Ross change curve. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was an American-Swiss psychologist who committed and dedicated her life to the hospice movement. She studied bereavement, and she studied what happens to us as people when we're about to lose someone who is dear and meaningful and material to our lives. And she said the first thing that happens when you realize you're going to lose someone is you go through a process of denial. It then turns into frustration when you realize you have no control over the outcome of a terminal illness, that it is sure death. And when that person dies, you go through a period of tremendous depression. The way to get out of it is to experiment a new way of life without that person, see what works, see what doesn't work, double down on what works, and then integrate that new way of living into the life ahead of you. And people said to me at the time, but surely you're being overdramatic. Surely you're being overdramatic. And what was interesting is that not one business owner thought we were. Because when you build a business, and you build the business very often in the image of your own psychology, the way you see the world, the comments I made earlier about we are trapped by the images of our past, and the way we look at the future is informed by our experiences of the past. And our experiences shape up our attitudes about the future. When you understand that cycle of cognitive relevance and perception in life, when you build a business, you put everything into it. It gives you meaning, it gives you value, it gives you relevance, it gives you income, it gives you hope, it gives you the ability to lead and take control of the future. And when the lockdown came and was announced, so many people in the early stages denied it. They said the first 3 months or the first 3 weeks was just a break. You know, at the end of 3 weeks, the lockdown will lift and will continue. I was arguing that we were going to be in this for between 18 to 24 months at the time, because an entrepreneurial mind is one that says, let me play my hopes, but let me work on the downside. Let me guard the downside and lift the upside. We saw people go through tremendous frustration. It was expressed as anger, it was expressed as fear. I myself, in the moment I realized we were going to be locked down, I remember driving home that evening. I rolled up my windows in my car and I shouted and screamed and swore at everyone in front of me in the traffic. No one heard, but I remember my frustration and the anger around the fact that my future, the strategy that lay ahead that I had so carefully planned, was going to be robbed of me by something beyond my control, was profound. I then fell into a well of depression, and I dwelled in that well for at least 2-3 minutes because of a series of tools that I personally developed over the years to maintain a positive, action-oriented, optimistic disposition despite the world around me. And I speak about those tools extensively in the book Reset, Rebuild, Reignite. We shared those tools with our clients. We forced people to use those tools. They thought we were mad, because what was vital for us was to get them into a positively orientated mindset. When you are feeling depressed, you cannot see, you cannot hear the signals out there to guide you out of that depression. It starts with your mindset. And we knew we had to address that mindset. We knew also we had to help our clients understand the mindsets of their teams, the mindsets of their customers, and their mindsets of their suppliers. Because what matters is that you cannot take good, positive action to lift yourself from depression unless you're on the right-hand side of this change curve. So when engaging with their teams, when engaging with customers and suppliers, they had to first individually assess where those individuals were so they knew how to engage with them to get the best impact. Once we had gotten that right, I used an analogy, and I used an analogy to separate people from their businesses. the ability to depersonalize the own drama in your life, the pity party that you're going through from a business point of view is essential. And I spent some time on ships myself as a youngster, and I learned the following things, that all ships are designed for a function. What you're seeing over here is a tugboat. It's designed in a very particular way. It's how it's shaped in a particular way to be a tugboat. That differs to an oil tanker. It differs to a leisure cruiser. It differs to a warship. The next thing I learned is that every ship has a purpose. It leaves a port to move to a destination. To the extent that you cannot define that destination and anchor your future, not in the present, but in that future, by defining that future in crisp, clear terms, what we refer to as the asset of value, means that you can't navigate your way there and you can't evaluate the resources you need to get there. When you set sail, for so long as you know where you're going to, and you know you need 10 days to get there, a good captain is going to build 15 days of food, fuel, and water. You're going to map your path there. You're going to take control of what you're doing today to make sure you get to that destination. Every ship operates with crews and systems, just as every business ought to. Every ship has an engine room which sits below decks to keep the propeller turning. And that gives you propulsion, it gives you momentum. And every ship has a bridge, and the bridge is where you control direction. And we use that analogy to land a strategy right across our client base that spoke to a 12-month process. The first thing we said we needed to do was, because COVID came and lockdown happened, the word crisis originates from the Greek word krisis, which means a change in state of health. Remember Elizabeth Kubler-Ross? There was going to be a change in circumstances. You deny it first. You go through frustration when you realize it's a reality. And it's your job and your job alone to get the hell out of that depression as fast as possible. And we said that strategy for us was going to be reset. And reset was saying, if there's a change in status quo, there's an opportunity to capitalize on change. Because if you built a business during status quo, the way that you succeeded then required a different approach to succeed when that change was taking place. The customers and clients you were selling to had a different set of circumstances, and unless you adjusted your entire business to meet their changed circumstances, they would not see you, they would not hear you, they would not engage with you. We said that mindset mattered. We said capital preservation was essential, and customer reorientation was critical. We wrote a series of letters to landlords, templates that were 5-6 pages long, with, I think, 6 different deal structures for every one of our clients, and the broad public, where I made them freely available, could use to negotiate with landlords. Stop money spending immediately. I had discussions with the SARS commissioner, notifying him that I was going to do the same around how to negotiate with SARS, how to negotiate your PAYE, how to negotiate your VAT, because capital preservation was essential. We delivered training on it to the broad public. We made it available. We wrote the letters. The letters were approved by SARS. We then spoke about how to manage people and how to manage your team. And during the reset phase, we locked and loaded our clients and anyone else who was interested in how to get through the reset very quickly. We moved everyone away from a transaction mindset to a relationship building mindset. We spoke about how to have different conversations to understand what the changed circumstances were for your team members, for your customers, for your suppliers, and then the stakeholders being landlords, banks, and SARS. Once we had gotten through that, and we managed that process very, very deliberately, we drove the process very deliberately and definitively. We realized also very quickly, one of the ways to lift people out of depression is to get them to act. The moment you act on something, as opposed to contemplate acting, the process of action immediately gives you a sense of being in control, that the future that lies ahead is increasingly becoming your future, as opposed to you being a victim of it. So we spurred action. With every one of our clients, we have a dashboard, and we use that dashboard to guide and crack the whip. After reset had been completed across that client base, we went into a rebuild phase, and we argued very, very quickly that you need to bake in the new habits that will be developed, the new ways of working that will be developed, the new activity sets that will drive and guide your business will be developed. And you had to bake them in materially, because people change slower than systems change. Your control as a business owner is to craft the systems, activities in a sequence that can be measured, that create an experience. We had to bake all of those in immediately across the way that you market the business, the way that you sell, the way that you engage your clients, the way that you deliver your services, the way that you administer your relationships. And we went through a period of building that scale. It is distinctly artisanal because structure determines behavior. And the new system sets that were built in order to be relevant to the new world we were facing would then see the team members change their behaviors and habits to fit in with the systems, because the systems measured their performance, and that performance impacted remuneration. We went through a process of exploring and enabling through digitization right across our client base. First in communication, then in coordination, then in collaboration, and then in competitive opportunities. We brought on more IoT activity across our client base last year than we've managed to bring in the last 5 years. And what that did is it set our clients on a path to organic growth. I'm going to share the stats in the next slide around what emerged there. And right now, we are going through the Reignite phase. The Reignite phase is really about next level growth. We created access to extensive lines of funding, especially equity funding. Banks don't lend to SMEs. Banks don't lend to SMEs. Banks don't lend to SMEs. And there are very, very good reasons for it. The reasons are often to do with the prudential requirements, the cost of lending to SMEs, and banks are largely built to offer debt products. Debt products in a changing environment or in a fast growth environment don't support growth nearly sufficiently. So we created access to funding and we leveraged the currency. And what I mean by that is the number of clients we have established in South Africa that have got scale baked into their businesses, that are now getting through digitized processes access to hard currency revenues, is our single biggest drive and thrust at the moment. So what did it look like? At the beginning of COVID, we had 538 live clients across the world. Touch wood, we're sitting with a few more at the moment. And I'm going to show you the quarter-to-quarter performance. What you see on the vertical axis is the percentage change. And these are the quarters from January 2020. And what we saw with revenue is revenue was slow from quarter to quarter. We had just come out of the December period. The December, January, February period is a slow period of revenue because of the December holidays. Most commercial activity in South Africa occurs in the last 2 quarters of every year. It then started to fall. We saw already the lockdown for March and April taking place here. It crashed significantly over here. It started to climb, and eventually by June, August, we started to see revenue growth come back. We then look at profit. And what happened in profit is with March, it fell immediately. One of the things that we had recommended very firmly to our clients was to restructure employment across 5 different strategies. And those 5 strategies saw 2-day work weeks, 3-day work weeks. It did see retrenchments. It did see compromises, negotiations, and cuts in salaries. It did see a fundamental shift to performance-based payments, and people were reticent to do it. They took it on in the second quarter, and we then started to see the impacts of longer negotiations than we anticipated taking place during March and May A lot of this is the March-April period. But look at this. After the reset period, in the reset rebuild period, look what happened to profitability. And in the May-July quarter, we saw the highest growth of profitability that we have ever seen in our client base. This has continued to grow largely because of digitized strategies in play. If I look at job performance, jobs were always slightly down in the first quarter. A lot of people take on temporary contractual employment in the last quarter of the previous year in order to cope with the October, November, December rush. Jobs didn't drop much at all until we got through to the thick of the lockdown. March, April, May, hard lockdown. Jobs fell. But interestingly, already April, May, June, so June onward, jobs started to increase. We don't foresee jobs rising at nearly the rate they did for the simple reason that these businesses are fundamentally more digitized than they previously were. They're fundamentally more niched in their offerings than they previously were. One of the most fundamental changes we saw was that in the South African economy, businesses had very, very broad positions in the market. And as they had started to digitize and tighten and start to look for opportunities in growth markets abroad, they started to narrow their focuses, their foci. And in that process, bringing on digitization has also resulted in a more lean structure. I want to talk very briefly and end up with the markets that we play and what we've seen. In South Africa, our strategy to COVID was open the economy. Without a doubt, we've had one of the most open economies during the period of the COVID lockdowns. There are certain industries that were battered, hospitality, of course, tourism, of course, but for the rest of it, the economy was left open. I think it was the slow response that we noticed across corporate South Africa to adapt and adopt a strategy to cope with COVID that slowed certain aspects of the economy down. From an SME point of view, the South African economy remains highly, highly concentrated. So the corporate sector growth is significant and has a significant impact to SME growth. The growth in our overall economy, and the reason we have traversed backwards for the last 10 years is because of weak leadership at government level. If there are 4 captains in a ship, and one captain wants to go to Mumbai, another captain wants to go to Hong Kong, another captain wants to go to New York, and the 4th captain wants to go to Antarctica, you can imagine what's going to happen to that ship. You completely fragment the momentum and create chaos and confusion and doubt in the crew and constantly tack and change directions. And our economy is led by that. We do not have a single, simple, well-articulated, overall communicated growth strategy for the country as to what our role will be in the global economy, how we will play, how we will position, and which areas we want to dominate. The tone of business today is very much centered around exit. The tone differs depending on race. A lot of the established businesses that are white-owned and white-led are looking to exit. There is a distinctive lacking confidence around economic leadership in the country. And we're seeing that play out in the SME space. In the US, the strategy we experienced is, well, there were 50, depending on which state that you played into. Some states took a firmer, more definitive view around lockdowns than others did. There was confusion seeded by the previous administration around how to cope with COVID, but there was a tremendous amount of government support that was provided. Growth is set to rocket. The COVID response that was negotiated at the beginning of this year and the infrastructure plan that will be implemented in the next 3 months or so in the US is gearing that country up for record levels of growth. And the tone is very positive, but concerned around the massive increases in taxes that businesses are expected to swallow in order to pay for what lies ahead. In the UK, what we noticed is a position of high care. What was so interesting is we use the ship analogy for our UK clients too. And about 70% of our UK clients turned around and said, hey, listen, there's a storm out there. And as a responsible captain, I'm going to go back to port. I'm going to batten down the hatches, and I'm going to send my clients, my crew, home on furlough. And I recall during that period, I was addressing an audience of around 100, 150 odd business owners. And I got asked the question on furlough. And thank heavens it was on Zoom, because I quickly went onto Google to look at what the word meant. And I was horrified to learn that it meant government would pay your staff salary on condition that they go home and do not work. Because that, as a privilege in South Africa, was never anything that we could contemplate. So many opted to do that. The other 40% opted to sail out into the storm, test their hulls and see what business model would work in this new environment, test their crew and see who could capacitate to cope with the new way of working, and get to the other side of the storm so that when it passed, there would be a step ahead in the market. But the tone very much around that environment is, tomorrow I'll tell you what we're doing. We are seeing a distinct lack of strategic foresight. And I think that's a privilege of living in an environment where the pressure to make a business grow and survive for your own survival and income is lessened. And in Europe, the strategy is about support. Growth remains uncertain, depending on pockets over there. And the tone is, it's another day in Europe. The view that we've taken, that we're promoting going forward, is this: a simple, scalable system of business growth to increase revenue, profit, and time, despite the environment you're in. Over the last 10 years, our growth in our clients has come from 3 areas. Big entities bring on big consultancies to define what strategy will work in a low-growth economy. Those strategies are delivered at a board and executive level. They are then communicated to mid-tier level management, who then have to communicate it to the next level below, who have to then communicate it to the next level below. And by the time those strategies land, a year has gone by, the financial results are not showing what they hope to be showing, and the big entities re-strategize again. One thing that has become clear is that bigger businesses generally, in order to develop more agility and to cope with more uncertainty, have thinned themselves out by outsourcing more and more non-core functions. And from a SME strategy point of view, we've targeted those and we feed for providing that service. The next thing that's happened is SMEs compete extensively with SMEs globally. Those business leaders in SMEs that have looked for growth-related support have by definition been growth-orientated. And because they are getting different perspectives, because they are escaping their own groupthink, because they are escaping the images of their own past, informing how they ought to grow their businesses going forward, because they're procuring different perspectives, that alone is allowing them to outcompete and outplay and output their competitors. And then the third factor is that when you make a commitment to grow and you decide that that is your predominant attitude, consciously and unconsciously, it affects the way that you behave. And that change in behavior gives you a different outcome, a different impact. Those are the 3 elements that we've capitalized on to secure and extract growth in the low-growth South African economy. And with that, I want to end off so we can open up for some questions. I'm sorry, I've taken a bit longer than I thought I would, but I'm very happy to remain on board if you have the time to remain on board. My ask of you, if I may start with that, is please help. We are growing a highly sophisticated service and product built in South Africa into foreign markets. And we want to work with South Africans. There is a resilience and an attitude that we have baked and built into us that we are unaware of, that distinguishes us and sets us apart. And we're looking for colleagues and contacts across the US, across Europe, across Ireland, across Australia, across New Zealand, and across the UK. So please reach out and let's have a conversation. And with that, I'd like to end this presentation and open up to the questions. So the first question from Anthony Abbott, how's it, Pavlo? Isn't it wonderful to hear how's it? It really is, it's almost like a secret handshake among South Africans. So how's it, Anthony? How can someone access, from Mr. Anonymous Attendee, how can someone access 207 activities? Well, read the books. I speak about them openly in the books, or alternatively, let's engage. Lawrence van Niekerk, hi Pavlo, what kind of businesses are these? IT, manufacturing, retail, and food. Great question. So Lawrence, we work across commercial systems. And the best way for me to communicate that to you is, so the Olympics are coming up. They may or may not happen. If the people of Japan have their way, it won't happen. It'll be postponed yet by another year. But imagine looking at an Olympic field. And what you see over there are athletes who are highly trained in very specific disciplines. So you have the shot putter, you have the long jumper, you have the 100-meter sprinter, and you have the marathon runner. And if you strip them all down, they've got fundamentally different muscular, skeletal structures. We see that as the business model suited to a sector and an industry. But what they all have in common are the same organs: a heart, liver, lung, kidney, and spleen. And each of those organs has to be optimized. And each of the organs has to work together smartly, controlled and managed through the brain. If you think about any business out there, it has to market to bring on new clients. It has to sell to convert clients into customers. It has to operate to deliver a service. It has to administer to manage the environment. It needs people to operate and do the right thing at the right time. The human resource set of activities. We work purely on the commercial functions. And because of that, we've got clients across the span of the industrial landscape, manufacturing landscape, services, professional services landscape, technology increasingly. Technology makes up about 35%, 40% of our client base. So we work across sector and across industry. Only if we are convinced we can have a growth impact because of the fact that our fees are attached to performance. Yes, I said digital marketing is dead. I did say that. 15 years ago, you would place an ad on Google. You'd place an ad on Facebook and it would light. You'd have responses. Nowadays, you are competing globally out there with companies far larger than you with far bigger budgets. Nowadays, we're working in a far more concentrated environment. If you think about where digital marketing takes place, there are effectively 3 countries globally that control that globally. They're all listed entities. They all have to deliver shareholder returns. They're constantly changing algorithms. This notion that you can build a community on LinkedIn or on Facebook or on Instagram that you can then access as a business owner to promote your offerings is not so. We've been duped. They ask us to build communities by generating exciting, interesting content so that more users adopt their platforms. But the moment you want to get access to that community, it's a pay-for-play basis. And then when you do, competing within that environment are competitors where they're landing and posting competing adverts into your own communities. The impact of digital marketing is nowhere close to what we used to understand it to be. It's no longer the silver bullet. It is the multiple lead bullets that need to be fired again and again and again to have an impact. I think we're going to go back increasingly to older forms of marketing.
Sorry, Pavlo, can I just step in there? I see we've reached 5 o'clock. So is it okay if I just do the closing and then those who want to stick around after 5 o'clock can then do so until you're happy to close?
Absolutely.
Sure, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Heather Bangwayo from the Alumni Relations Office. I'd like to start off by saying a massive thank you to Pavlo for today's webinar. I'm sure we've all learned something valuable in today's session. I was recently listening to a podcast from one of our local radio stations, and I was really fascinated to hear about the increasing numbers of people that are have started looking at going into business, either going into business or diversifying and growing existing businesses. And this was obviously in the context of COVID-19 and the effect that it's had on people's jobs, on businesses, and the comfort zones that people would have found themselves in prior to the pandemic. I imagine a number of our own Fitsies on the call today who would be watching this might have found themselves in similar situations. So it's really been fantastic and fitting to have Pavlo share just a little bit of his expansive knowledge on business with us today, and also to answer questions that you all might have. I see the questions are coming in pretty thick and fast now. Thank you for those. And especially in a time when people are working so hard to pick up the pieces, of income streams and businesses that have been severely impacted by the pandemic. So Pavlo, thank you very much. We really appreciate what you've spoken about to us today. And then, as always, in the Alumni Relations Office, we're constantly working really hard to provide you all with resources and material that will be useful to you all in your continued learning and development. I do hope that today's session has taught you something new, has got you asking questions that might have been lying in there somewhere dormant for a while, or ignited or reignited something in you. So we in the office, and I'm sure Pavlo as well, would be really happy to hear your comments and your feedback after today. I'd also like to thank Professor Rangasamy, who is the acting head at the Business School, who opened the event for us today. He happily stepped in, like he said at the beginning. He very happily stepped in when we called out to him at the last minute and was able to share his time with us today and be in the event. Thank you so much, Prof. Lastly, but not least, I'd like to thank you all for being able to make it here today. For those of you who've dialed in from all over the world, we had people registering from the States, from the UK, from Australia, literally from all over the world. Welcome, and thank you all so much for joining today. And to those who are going to catch up on YouTube as we are live streaming the event, welcome and thank you to you as well. I do look forward to seeing you all again next month when we have our June webinar, where we're really looking forward to having Greg Solomon, who is the CEO of McDonald's South Africa. Until then, thank you and goodbye. It's not really goodbye, like I said already. You're welcome to stick around as Pavlo is still taking questions. Thank you so much.
Wonderful, thank you, Heather. I also noticed that I was called Pippa Rolls. I do beg your pardon, I've corrected the name, and I'm certainly not Pippa Rolls. So moving on, if I may, I'm going to spend another 7 minutes answering questions. I will get back to everyone who has placed a question. That was my promise to you, and I'll certainly do so through Bits and through Heather and her team. So there's a great question here from Tabello. Having built a dashboard of the system of value and given the need to access growth capital, I find myself in a state in the business. I find myself in a state that the business needs capital to fund growth, setting up the system of delivery along with buying inventory given my business model. The long and short, what are the factors to consider when raising capital through equity financing? Oh my word, Tabello, that is a huge question, and it really deserves a 1-hour presentation in its own right. So in instances where you can raise debt funding to fund anything, it's always the preferred route. It's always the preferred route because capital, equity is expensive to a business. And debt is always useful in a predictable environment. You think about what debt does, and of course there's some debt structure products. You can raise the debt, but in the month that you raise it, you have to start paying the principal or interest portion of it back month on month thereafter. So if you're in a steady state of growth, if you're looking to acquire assets that can be used as collateral to support the debt, and if you can prevent that debt if you can prevent the payments of the debt being consumed into impacting your cash flow that you would typically use to grow your business, then do so. So if you're acquiring a vehicle, do so with debt. If you're acquiring a piece of plant and equipment, do so with debt. If you're acquiring a property, do so with debt. But here's the thing, there are two types of growth in a business. You have organic growth and you have next level growth. In an organic growth state, debt is the best form of funding, I still fundamentally believe. It can be expensive, but you can access trade finance, you can access overdraft, you can access factoring, which is horribly expensive, but it can plug a gap for you. And organic growth is something that should deliver your business year-on-year growth of anywhere between 8 and 12, 15%, depending on what sector and what industry, and depending on the state of maturity of your business. However, if you're pursuing next level growth is like saying, well, I'm going to start, I'm running, as the athlete, I'm running at 5.5, 6 minutes a K, and I want to start running at 4 minutes a K. It's a significant increase in growth. That's only possible once you have organic growth in play, and that's only possible if you yourself are not responsible for that organic growth. So the design of the business is a feature and function over here. If you have organic growth in play and you're pursuing next level growth, it has to be equity, because the cash burn rate in accessing a new market or acquiring a competitor or establishing and building a new suite of services or products or embarking on a massive digitization strategy, by definition, is investment. When you then select your partner for that equity, you have one of two options. Select and make the decision purely on price. For raising $3 million, how much equity will I give away? It's a pricing decision. Alternatively, you can make a strategic decision, which says price will matter, but price won't matter nearly as much as a group of equity partners that will help me get to where I want to get to faster, quicker, more simply, more reliably, because they have access to market, or they have a set of skills, or they can bring 3 or 4 non-tangible benefits on board that will ensure my success at a higher rate. When you do bring equity partners on board, you need to understand what your game plan is. Are you building to grow to the next level with the view to then exit them, given their returns, in order to reacquire back the equity, so you have 100% of a far bigger pie, even though it's cost you money to get there, but it's shortened the time cycle to get there? Or are you building to flip and exit the business? The equity partners you bring on board will be fundamental in that instance, because they will be able to help you build the business to exit and build the business to exit successfully to a larger acquirer. So that's when you go along with them and you exit. The intention behind why you're raising that equity funding really matters. And it matters in the immediate requirement of the equity funding. What is the next level growth that you're pursuing? But it matters equally around why do you do what you do? Where do you want to be 5 years, 7 years, 10 years down the line? And it raises an interesting question, because very much there are two flavors out there around how you build a business to generate wealth for yourself. Obviously, the business needs to generate income. And for us as business owners, our wealth is created through salaries that we pay ourselves and through dividends that we earn on an annual basis or quarterly basis or periodic basis. But dividends don't create wealth. The wealth is really created from the liquidity moment, when you monetize the years of investment and risk through a successful exit and capital gain. And there are two different approaches. You might be a business owner who says, hey, listen, I want to build something and I want to take it up to a, let's use a number, 100 million Rand valuation. Or I want to build something and I want to exit my first business on a 10 million Rand valuation. I then will reinvest that into a second business, which I want to exit for a 30 million Rand valuation. And then I'll reinvest that into a third business and I want to exit it at a 50 million Rand valuation. And it depends very much on your own capability and your own psychology. Some people are really good at the early stage of building a business fast and furiously, but really bad at building it into something significantly bigger. The entrepreneurial mindset has to move to a management leadership mindset. They're very, very different flavors. And seldom do I see one person having it all. If you look in the background behind me, my business partner has the ability to build Aurik into 10 times the size that it is. My skills are very much centered around the first 7-10 years of growth. Her skills are very much centered around building the institutional framework to turn this into a business that exists well beyond my lifetime. So that kind of knowledge matters when you talk about raising equity funding. I hope that answers your question, and I hope it gave you some good insights. Mr. Masima, it would be great if you share all questions and answers to all, will you? I'll certainly find some time in order to respond to the answers. I'll send them through to Bits, and I've no doubt that Bits will. Bits really have, they want everyone to get the benefit and enjoy the outcome of this. And I think it's a good way to build the community that we spoke about earlier. Christopher Wright, happy to chat later. We help expanding your business. Previously managing partner, Deloitte, MD, Accenture, and now leading a software development platform. Fantastic. I will definitely take you up on that, Christopher. Thank you for the opportunity. Cecil, as a company in the steel manufacturing industry in SA, oh my word, main costs such as energy and labor are in the hands of monopolies. Absolutely right. In the hands of monopolies and the seemingly inept ability of government to deregulate the energy environment. And unions, yes, absolutely, I agree with you. And at the same time, having to compete with Chinese export makes it an extremely tough environment to make a profit and grow. What's the solution? The solution, honestly, Cecil, in my view, is three things. Last man standing will have a benefit over here. I think that we will get to a increasingly deregulated environment. I think that with big business shrinking, the impact of unions is going to be diminished over a period of time, but it won't happen anytime soon. It would be great if our unions were far more business-minded. There is a fantastic hypothesis that I have built, which I've managed to land and sell, interestingly, to government officials in the US, in Europe, and in the UK. I'm yet to have the opportunity here in South Africa that talks about economic vibrancy at a sector-specific level. In other words, how do you create vibrancy within a sector? It leverages extensively off the GEM surveys that talk about the number of startups in a sector, and it migrates all the way through the business life cycle to define the dominant players in a sector. It talks about what creates vibrancy in a sector. And certainly from what I've witnessed in a more deregulated environment, but not completely deregulated environment, one in which competition is fair, the extent to which you deregulate brings in new opportunities. To the extent that we increase business establishment within any one sector or industry, means that we increase competition. And if you think about it as a business owner, what do you do when you are being increasingly competed against? Well, if you don't respond to the competition by innovating, crafting a new product, crafting a new proposition as a whole, you will die. And out of sheer necessity, we innovate. And the moment you innovate, what does it do? It attracts two things which make business happen. It attracts talent and it attracts funding. And the moment you get talent and funding on board into your business, what does it mean? It means that you compete more effectively. And what does that mean for your competitors? It means that they don't respond and compete. They die. So what do? They themselves then craft different propositions. And so it becomes a virtuous cycle. And within that cycle, you bring more startups into the sector and industry. More of those move into small businesses. More than before moved into medium-sized businesses. More of those move into bigger businesses. And those bigger businesses are acquired by the corporate entities. Because corporate entities don't grow sectors. Corporate entities buy the growth in a sector. Corporate entities don't innovate sectors. They buy the innovation driven into the sector by the competing SMB, small, medium businesses that operate in that sector. This goes back to the earlier question. If you're playing in that particular sector, you might be, I'm going to be an individual who builds 3 businesses over a 20-year period. I'm going to build and exit, build and exit, build and exit. That's going to be my wealth path. Well, I'm going to be the individual who builds a small business into a medium-sized business, into a bigger business, which I might then list to compete with the bigger entities or have it acquired by the bigger entities. It creates such vibrancy and opportunity, and I see that extensively in the American economy. I'm convinced that that is one of the predominant features that we never speak sufficiently about, that is so evident around how to lift the performance of each of our sectors over here. But of course, all of that is going to be premised by the strategy that South Africa chooses to adopt around how to compete in the global environment, the global value chain. What is it that we want to be market leaders in? Where do we want to develop capability? Where do we want to lead it in terms of regulation? Where do we want to lead it in terms of our academic institutions, building and baking in those skills to youngsters to feed the talent pool to help us dominate across 3 or 4 sectors in 3 or 4 or 5 different industries? That's what's needed in this country to lift the economy. I promise you there's enough skill, there's enough intent, there's enough hunger, and there's enough resilience, certainly in the environments that I work in, to lift the economy and grow the economy well beyond where we are at the moment. So going back to the steel sector, it's a last man standing the way I see it. I think those that do manage to hang out there, the timeline's hard to define, but those who do manage to hang out there will be able to capitalize on growth that will come through. It depends very much on your age. I don't know how old you are. I don't know how long you've been in the game. I don't know how long your business has been established. If you're early in the game, I would switch to a far more vibrant sector, one that is starting to show some shape and performance a little bit earlier. Because if you don't have time or appetite to be the last man standing, I think it's going to be a really hard one to succeed in. Folks, I'm sitting at 17 minutes past. I have an event taking place in the UK. As promised, I will get back to you on all the questions. It'll take me a week and a bit or so, so please be patient. Heather, once I've responded to all the questions, I'll pass the information on to you. And I'm hoping that you're able to distribute it to all the individuals that asked the questions. For those of you who've offered help, I will pick up with you. Thank you so very, very much for being with me today. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Next time we do this, I've asked Heather if we can do it in a massive Zoom meeting, because I'd love to rather speak to you directly and see your face. Wouldn't it be wonderful to engage and connect with each other again? Thank you all very, very much. If you have an opportunity, listen out at 7:30. No, 7:15 this evening on The Money Show. And please call in. Fire questions at Bruce Whitfield. Let's overwhelm him tonight. We're going to be talking about, you built a website. Why is no one watching it? Until then, have an entrepreneurial week ahead. Thank you all very, very much.